This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
If you take a child and put him in a room with a rabbit and an apple, he's much more likely to play with the rabbit and eat the apple than the other way around.
Jean Baur, it's so exciting to have an opportunity to visit with you. You have a book, Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, and we're excited to have you in our area. Tell me about, this isn't just a book you've just written. This is a book about the way you've lived your life.
That's right. It's a book about living in a way where we try to not cause unnecessary harm. Mm-hmm. And a large part of that has to do with our food. Most of us grow up supporting a food system that causes enormous suffering to animals. It's not good for us health-wise. It's bad for the environment. We eat factory farm meat without really thinking about it. So in Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, we talk about living in a way that is more mindful, more compassionate, eating plants instead of animals. And by doing this, we can actually take a large bite out of global warming, climate change, mm-hmm. because animal agriculture is one of the top contributors to climate change. And also, it's been estimated we could save 70% on healthcare costs in this country by eating plants instead of animals. So in Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, we include amazing recipes for people that are interested in shifting away from eating animal foods, which cause so much harm.
You know, you're in Nashville for the Veggie Fest as a guest speaker, and you have traveled to Middle Tennessee on a few occasions. And I want to get back to this because agriculture obviously is a huge industry here in our region, in our area. A lot of farmers. In fact, WCTE is very involved in connecting the consumer to the producer, mm-hmm. And I just find the recipes you have in here, the information you have in here is very, very interesting. Yeah. So why have you taken this route?
Well, you know, most people, I think, are humane and don't want to support cruelty.
Right.
But most of us unwittingly support cruelty without really knowing it. And so by investigating factory farms, as I started doing in the 1980s, the goal was to expose this cruelty and encourage people to be aware of it and then ultimately to make choices that they could feel good about, mm-hmm. instead of saying, don't tell me, I don't want to know, right. when the issue of factory farming comes up, because that is often the case. And the good news about it, though, is that everybody can be empowered through their food choices. Mm-hmm. You know, instead of feeling defeated or that we have to participate in an abusive system, we can be more mindful and choose to eat in a way that is aligned with our values and also aligned with our interests, to mm-hmm. eat food that nourishes us instead of makes us sick. But if you look at it, we're eating food in this country that makes us sick. You know, many people die of heart disease at a much younger age than they need to. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be that way. So just by changing how we eat, we can improve our lives, people can get off of medication, mm-hmm. people have more energy, and every day, you know, we can each make a choice that makes a difference.
Where did you grow up, and what sort of influences were in your life at an early age that you think led you on this journey?
I grew up in Hollywood, California, in the Hollywood Hills. My parents still live there. And I was near Griffith Park, mm-hmm. and I saw how wildlife was negatively impacted by human beings. Mm. I saw deer that were hit by cars. There was one that was stuck in a chain link fence near my parents' house who had to be killed. I remember a neighbor making their house bigger, and they cut down this beautiful oak tree. And I was just viscerally bothered by that. Mm-hmm. And growing up in LA, you know, you're not really aware of factory farming or animal agriculture, and you're participating in it. So I was eating meat without really recognizing it. But as time went, I started learning about how veal calves are raised, for example. Mm-hmm. My grandmother told me about that, and so I stopped eating veal in high school. And as time went, I just learned more about animal agriculture and the harm it was causing. And in 1985, I went vegan. In 1986, I co-founded Farm Sanctuary. And I basically, the basic instinct was I just didn't want to cause unnecessary harm. Right. And when I realized that it was possible to live well without eating other animals, it was an easy decision.
You say you're vegan. Can you explain what that is and how that really differs from being a vegetarian?
Yet to me, being a vegan is an aspiration to live as kindly as possible, which means not supporting abusive industries. So I don't eat meat, I don't eat cow's milk, I don't eat eggs, I eat plant foods and no animal foods. And you know, we are all works in progress. No human being is perfect. Just living on this planet, we're going to cause some harm. But to the extent we can lessen that, I think it's a good thing. And so for me, going vegan was that expression. And the more we look at the emotional lives of other animals, the more we see how complex they are and how meaningful their lives are to each of them, and how they have emotions and connections with other animals and with people. And that's not something most of us think about when we're eating animals. In fact, we have a desire not to think about it, because if we're causing harm and we don't feel good about it, we either go into denial and rationalization, or we make a shift. And I think most people live in a state of sort of dissonance, where they are compassionate, they don't like to see cruelty and suffering, but they're also complicit in it by their food choices. You know, and it's a very emotional thing. Food is a very emotional issue. And the goal of living the farm sanctuary life is just to encourage people to think about this and to recognize that their food choices have profound impacts on their own health, as well as on other animals and on the planet, and that we can make choices that are better for us, better for the earth, and better for other animals.
You have traveled a lot in your career, and you've been on a lot of TV shows, The Daily Show, Martha Stewart, just a number of television shows. You've been part of Forks Over Knives.
Yes.
And I know you know Gene Stone, who's a partner with your book here, and also he was involved very heavily with that.
Forks Over Knives, yeah.
So there is a real food movement, I think, in our country, in our state, in our rural community where we live. There is a respect for farmers, a respect for knowing where your food comes from. And so how do you see that as you're moving across the country? What's your take on that?
I think it's a very exciting time. People are paying more attention to their food. They want to know where the food comes from, and they want to know how it was produced, and they want ultimately to feel good about it. They don't want to eat food that is laced with toxic chemicals. They want to eat food that is nourishing. And so more people now are going to farmers markets, which is great. People are going to community gardens. They're getting involved with community-supported agriculture programs. Some people are growing their own food, you know, changing seeds, you know, exchanging seeds and sharing seeds. And gardening and farming can be a very generous and connecting activity. You know, when you grow food and you share it with somebody, it's a very kind act. And the earth can be very giving. And it's a matter of paying attention to that, being appreciative of that, and sharing it with others. So oftentimes when people have gardens, others come over and they spend time together in the garden. And this is also healthy exercise, you know, and being outdoors in a positive environment with friends and neighbors. It's a win-win. And then growing food that nourishes us, and growing plant foods does that. And when you think about going to a berry patch or an orchard or growing vegetables and picking plant foods, it's a very different experience than going to a slaughterhouse. And this is something I think it's good for people just to think about in terms of what we feel good about eating. And you know, when you visit slaughterhouses, as I have, you know, you see animals that are suffering, but it also does something to people. You know, people have to kind of shut off their empathy and not look into the eyes of the animals and not really think very much about the fact that these were living, feeling creatures to kill them. So plant farming is just much more nurturing. I think it's more aligned with who we are as human beings. You know, if you take a child and put him in a room with a rabbit and an apple, he's much more likely to play with the rabbit and eat the apple than the other way around. And I think that says something. You know, most people, if we were natural carnivores, and we saw an animal that was injured and dying, we would start salivating because that would be food. But we don't tend to do that. That's
a really good point. And I want to ask you about Farm Sanctuary. I want to talk about whether people can visit. But I want to touch on one thing. We're actually taping this in the Nashville Public Library. And this book, your book, is on their shelves here. It's also part of an ebook series that folks anywhere can participate in. I'm sure you have that all across the country. But they also have a seed exchange here for herbs and flowers and fruits and veggies. What does that say to you about this Middle Tennessee region?
That says that this movement is growing. It's beautiful to see, and it's empowering, you know, and the fact that the library has a seed exchange, I think, speaks to the community aspect of it. It's a place where people can come and share information, share seeds, and learn from each other. And libraries are places of learning where there are ideas, but also when it comes to food, these ideas can be put into practice. And seeds are, I think, a beautiful way to do that.
Yes.
You plant a seed. You know, we often talk about in advocacy and education, we're planting seeds, planting ideas. But when you have actually a seed exchange, you're doing it, you know, very physically and directly.
Right. You get to extend that learning, right?
Yes, and watch it grow.
Right.
And then evolve.
Right.
And then when you grow food and eat it, it actually becomes part of you. You incorporate it into your body, just like when you read something that is very moving, it becomes part of you in some way. So there's an interesting sort of poetic parallel there.
Do you think people are just intimidated? They don't know how to eat healthy. They don't know how to necessarily prepare. I mean, I grew up with my family. They canned, they farmed, but we've gotten away from that. Most of us have really gotten away from that.
I think we're creatures of habit, and we do things because they're familiar and we grew up doing them.
Right.
And as you say, most people today have not grown up canning or with a garden.
Right.
But I think a lot of people now are hungering for that and going back to the idea of growing food and canning. But we're creatures of habit, and I think changing from one habit to another one can be scary. And we're also bombarded with messages through mass media that we need to drink cow's milk, for example, to get calcium so we don't get osteoporosis, which is a complete myth. In our country, we drink a lot of cow's milk, and we also get a lot of osteoporosis. So there's sort of an empirical disconnect there between the reality and our belief. And when it comes to meat, we grow up believing you need to have meat for protein, which is also a myth. They're used to eating a certain way, and when you change how you eat, it just is a matter of changing habits. And for me, it's very easy now. And it's never been easier for people that are interested in moving towards eating plant foods instead of animal foods. You go to mainstream grocery stores now, and there are all kinds of alternatives to cow's milk. You have cashew milk, soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk. And there are also alternatives to meat for people who like that sort of taste and texture. There's veggie meatballs. So you can have spaghetti and meatballs, but instead of meatballs made out of ground beef, you can have meatballs made out of veggie sources.
Right.
And then also there's beans and just great veggie foods anyway.
Some places are more rural and not as easy to access some of the alternatives. There certainly is access to plants, but not always to the milk substitutes, things like that.
No, it's true. Some markets are much more plentiful when it comes to plant-based substitutes for animal products, like alternatives to cow's milk or alternatives to various meat products. But most places you go, you can find beans, you can find greens, you can find fruits and vegetables. Whole grains are also very good for us. So just eating a variety of plant foods is actually the best advice. Eating meat substitutes, I see those more as transitional. They're not actually as good for you in most cases as beans, which are full of nutrients, full of protein, full of fiber, very healthy foods.
Now you're also, and we're going to run out of time before I get to ask you all the things I want to ask you, but you're also a pretty outstanding athlete. You're a marathoner, you're a triathlete. So you do all that as a vegan? I
do that as a vegan, and it's to demonstrate that vegans can get all the nutrients they need through plants to do marathons, to do triathlons, including an Ironman.
Wow.
And which is what I've done, but there are elite athletes who are breaking records and as plant-based eaters. The only U.S. male weightlifter to make the Olympics in Rio was a vegan. And there are ultra-marathoners, Scott Jurek, for example, who won the Western States 100-mile race 7 times in a row as a vegan. Wow. And he's won many other races too as a vegan. So this idea that you can't get the nutrients you need is just a myth, one of those things that we grow up believing.
Right.
But there are athletes now that are recognizing that by eating plants, they have better recovery, they can perform at a higher level, and so plant foods can fuel, high-level athletic performance.
Let me get to the farm sanctuary, because I don't want to run out of time and not have a chance to really, what is it? Where are they? I know you have more than one location, and can people actually go visit?
Yes, well, Farm Sanctuary started back in the 1980s when we would visit farms and stockyards and slaughterhouses, and we would literally find living animals left for dead in trash cans sometimes, or left on piles of dead animals. So we started rescuing them, and we now operate sanctuaries in New York, in California, and people are welcome to come visit. And you can go to our website, farmsanctuary.org, for information on that. We also have overnight accommodations at our farm in Watkins Glen. We do events at the farms, and these are places where the animals are our friends, not our food. And people get a chance to look into the eyes of a pig and to give them a belly rub and to watch them flop over and grunt in pleasure as you're giving them a belly rub. And you can look into the eyes of a cow, and these are gentle giants, and they're beautiful animals. And we have turkeys that follow you around like puppy dogs. They're very curious and friendly. So they're not that different than our cats and dogs. And that's really the message at Farm Sanctuary, is that these are living, feeling animals. They have feelings, they have memories, they develop relationships with others. And when we treat them with respect, it's good for them, and it's also good for us.
Right.
Kindness to animals benefits us as well. It lowers stress. When you interact with animals in a positive way, it actually improves our lives.
You have in your book like 10 ways that you can instantly sort of get into this movement without having to just say, okay, today I'm going to be a vegan. But you've got some suggestions of ways that, what are some of those?
One thing people can do is to participate in a Meatless Monday. If it seems scary to go vegan overnight, and I can understand that, try one day a week, like Monday. And by doing that, you become familiar with the sorts of plant foods you can eat instead of animal foods. Another good idea is to eat a lot of ethnic food, because historically human beings have been primarily plant eaters. Growing plants for food is much more efficient than growing crops, harvesting them, feeding animals, and raising animals for food. So animal agriculture requires an enormous amount of resources, which is why historically we've eaten primarily plants. So if you eat ethnic foods like Chinese food or Mexican food or Ethiopian food, Thai food, it tends to be very plant-based. So that's another really good tip.
What's something else that folks can do? So if they just give up meat on Monday, I read somewhere in your book that if people would practice being vegan until 6 or something.
Yeah,
what is that?
There's a book by Mark Bittman called Vegan Before 6.
Okay.
And so, that's another approach to create some sort of discipline and practice within one's own daily eating habits. So vegan before 6. And so just eat plant foods and healthy foods before 6, and then after that, although eating late at night is not generally a good idea anyway,
Right.
whatever you eat.
Right.
But that's a good way, I think, to start eating more mindfully and eating more healthfully. And just eating more fresh food and greens.
Right.
And you start feeling better. I think if people start eating this way, they're going to want to stay doing it. That's why I think a Meatless Monday is very good, because people are more likely to then add plant foods throughout the week. I think vegan before 6 is good, because I think people are going to start recognizing that they feel better, and if they eat a lot of heavy food late at night, they're not going to feel very good, so they're going to tend towards more plants over time.
I've been very fortunate in visiting local farms, meeting really compassionate farmers. And I know you've had a lot of experience with factory farming, but what about those local individual farmers that are throughout our country?
Farmers work very hard, and I respect and appreciate the work farmers do. And in some cases on factory farms, they've kind of gotten themselves on treadmills, and I feel bad for them, in fact. And there's been this push towards less industrial farming techniques, which is a positive thing. But still, most of the products being labeled as free range come from farms that are a lot like factory farms. And the more removed you are from the source of the food, the more likely it is that these farms don't really meet the label's expectation.
Right.
People,
right.
if they hear free range, they think animals are outdoors
Right.
and have a great life. It's not usually the case. So that's something just to be mindful of, that these labels sound better than they are, and they are largely a way to market these products, not so much to describe the reality. The only way to really know is to actually visit farms.
So another reason then to experience farmers markets.
Absolutely. You go to farmers markets, you get to know farmers, you get to know where the food is coming from, you're more connected. And that's a very positive thing, just because you're better informed, and you get to know farmers, and you also get to learn from them, and they can learn from you. If there are certain things that you are concerned about, you can express that.
You've probably met really a lot of people in your travels who are very involved in this food movement. Who are some of the folks who are most impressive to you?
You know, I am very moved by activists, grassroots activists in different cities that are making a difference. Mm-hmm. There's a teacher in New York's Bronx, for example, who started teaching his kids how to grow plants, and the attendance at that school started going up. These kids are now growing produce, and they're doing entrepreneurial things and doing landscape gardening and edible gardening in different parts of the city. So teachers, kids that are being inspired to make a difference in their communities. Here in Nashville, there are people that organize this Veg Fest, volunteers that put in long days to organize this event where thousands of people could come and learn about plant-based foods. So wherever I go, I meet individuals that are doing things in their communities that are making a big difference, and they're empowering people around them to live in a way that is more compassionate, more healthful, more sustainable when it comes to the earth. Mm-hmm. And they're just good examples. There's so many people leading by example and making a difference in communities all over the country.
You know, one of the most really great things about your book, Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, are recipes.
Yes.
So you have a lot of really great recipes in here.
You know, a lot of times people worry about, if I go vegan, what could I eat?
Right.
And I thought it was important to show that there are so many different kinds of things you can eat. In fact, most people are already eating a lot of vegan food.
Right.
You know, so they can oftentimes eat a lot like they are with just some minor changes. So the recipes in the book are wonderful. We've got some great chefs who contributed. It's about 100 recipes. And some of them are very fancy, some of them are very simple. So there's something for everybody.
All right. And again, this is available at the library. I'm sure it's available at libraries all across the country.
That's right.
Where are some other places people should go to learn more about being an activist or really just learning about this movement?
Well, you know, the good news is that we have the internet.
Yes, yes.
And you can Google practically anything. So you can even Google recipes like vegan lasagna or vegan whatever. You can also join meetup groups. There are vegan meetup groups in different communities. There are Facebook groups. There's ways to connect with people on social media that also sometimes speak about events happening in your community. There are vegan dinner clubs where people get together and go to a restaurant and have a vegan dinner. And if the restaurant is not vegan and they know you have 10 people coming who want a vegan dinner, they're going to figure out what to make. And then that's another way to actually educate restaurants about supplying plant-based foods and accommodating that interest. So it's a community-oriented activity, and I think just engaging in the community is so important. At Farm Sanctuary, we have an Adopt a Farm Animal program where people can sponsor an animal who lives at Farm Sanctuary. We send them the picture of the animal, and they get updates. And every year for Thanksgiving, we do an Adopt a Turkey program where we encourage people to save a turkey instead of killing one for Thanksgiving. So that's one of our annual events that we encourage people to get involved with.
Wow, and you do something called Compassionate Meal?
Compassionate Meals, that's right, where people can actually go out and have a compassionate meal. We have a website, Compassionate Meals, and videotape it, and we just want to share this with people. So bring a friend out to a compassionate meal, talk about it, let them know that these meals are compassionate, they're healthy, they're satisfying, and you're not giving anything up.
I saw a young woman, she's an actress, and her dad is an...
Yes, they did a compassionate meal.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, now I've totally blanked on her name, but I thought that was pretty fascinating. He was absolutely not a vegan. He was a big, major meat eater, but he said, you know, this is good. And she got to share with him.
I love it when daughters share with their parents about how healthy and how good it feels to eat plant-based in a way that is nutritious, but also aligned with compassionate values. When you know you're not supporting unnecessary cruelty, it feels really good.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of food. It's about community.
Right.
The word comida and community have the same root.
Right.
And we gather together to break bread. And this is where being vegan in a non-vegan world can sometimes be challenging. But it's important, I think, for vegans to be integrated and to connect with and to share meals with other people and to show that eating vegan is not that hard. One of the best things I think that vegan activists can do is to bring vegan food to work and share it, and bring vegan food to parties and to gatherings and show that it's very tasty and you're not giving anything up. I've had so many people over the years tell me that, oh, I could never go vegan just because they're afraid of it.
Right.
But the same people, after they have a great vegan meal, say, oh, I could do this. So food is an amazing tool, and it's very emotional too. We have a lot of attachments to food, and that's one of the things that sometimes can make change a little bit more scary.
Right.
So to the extent we can make it less scary and more attractive and show that you're not giving anything up, I think the more this will continue to accelerate.
Well, Gene, we're out of time, but this has just been a delight, and thank you so much for educating me and our viewers and sharing this time with us.
Well, wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much for your interest in this, and hopefully we'll see each other again before too long.
I hope so.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.